Hello, everybody. Lovely to see you all again at the summit stage. We're nearing the end of the third and last day of CogX, but it's been wonderful to have you all. Feel free to tweet at hashtag CogX 2020. And in our penultimate session on this stage, we're going to take on the question of the future, AI. The double whammy of Covid-19 and recession really are shaking things up. But is AI going to save us? And could it give companies coming out of this crisis the edge? To lead us through this discussion, I'd like to welcome Tim Gordon, and he is the managing partner at Best Practice AI. Hello, Tim.
Hi, Joy. Thank you so much for this, and thank you to you and the entire team for the fantastic time we've had at CogX so far, and very excited to be here for the closing stages of the conference. I guess there are three things we want to sort of think about in this session. Firstly is just the sheer impact in which AI is increasingly being seen as one of the technologies that's going to emerge very strongly from the COVID crisis and the enforced digitization that we're all going through at the moment in terms of transforming how businesses operate. Second big question, obviously, is we're likely entering a pretty grim recession, and typically in recessions, we have new winners that emerge, and also the survivors from the previous stage are often the companies that go through quite large transformations. And AI very much looks like being one of the apex technologies in terms of that shift. And third, the combination of both COVID, but also some of the stuff we're seeing at the moment is really bringing to the fore some of the underlying debates and questions around AI ethics and risks, which have been things which maybe in the past were discussed in learned groups like the CogX sessions, but maybe not so widely debated. Whereas now things like data privacy and bias in algorithms are things which are increasingly hitting the front pages of the news. Now, to discuss these great topics, we've got a fabulous panel today, and I'm delighted to introduce the panelists we have. First, we've got Professor Marco Iansiti. He is the David Sarnoff Professor of Business Administration at Harvard Business School, where he heads the Technology and Operations Management Unit and also the Digital Initiative. He's recently published, in combination with Karim Lakhani, a fantastic book called Competing in the Age of AI. And hopefully he's going to tell us a bit more about really what that big structural change looks like. To help respond to him and really bring things to life, we've got Jesus Mantas, who's from Senior Managing Partner at IBM Services, who's also on the Biogen Board of Directors. And we're delighted to have Jesus here. Obviously, AI has been a key story in this. Karen Silverman, who's CEO and founder of the Cantellus Group, is joining us. She was previously at Latham & Watkins, and last year she was voted one of the top AI lawyers in California. She's also a member of the AI Global Council at the World Economic Forum. And rounding things off, we got Vinay Menon, who is the global lead for the AI practice at Korn Ferry, very much to talk to the people aspects, which are so key to AI and rollout. He's also a senior client partner on the broader technology front. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Marco, please, to talk us through Competing in the Age of AI.
Thank you so much. It is such an honor to be part of this, and so much pleasure to be part of such a great panel. Thank you for inviting me, and I'm super excited to talk a little bit about this topic. Let me share a few slides. I wanted to start back a little bit before the pandemic. Karim Lakhani and I launched this new book in January. So we had about a month and a half or so to go before our travel started to get more restricted and tricky. And we were actually traveling all over Europe when things really started to increase with COVID. But it was an interesting process. And one of the things that we were really emphasizing is that this new book fundamentally is about how AI is really changing the economy and changing the world around us in ways that are very, very deep and fundamentally transformational for the business environment. Essentially, the way that we think about this is that the AI that is pervasive is relatively simple AI. We're not talking about the stuff of science fiction. We're not talking about sentient beings, but we're talking about relatively simple algorithms which, with rich data, are fundamentally changing the way that the economy works and the way that the companies are built. One example that we talk about a lot is Ant Financial. Which I think there's already been part of CogX in different ways. But Ant is such an interesting organization, spun out of Alibaba around the payment system Alipay. And over the years, Ant Financial has grown to essentially 1.5 billion users of Alipay and spun off a variety of different businesses. Yuebao, which is now the world's largest money market fund, Jima Credit, which is probably one of the world's largest credit rating systems, My Bank, which awards hundreds of millions of loans every year. it's just an amazing array of businesses built around Alipay, the data that Alipay generates, combined with other data sets and other sort of user-based interactions to really power a new financial services institution, which has more impact and is larger than fundamentally almost any existing global bank, built around very different kinds of principles. How could this company actually work and scale so quickly to do such a variety of things? Well, the answer is this company is built very differently. This is not an industrial company in the kind of companies that we built in the last 100, even 200 years since the Industrial Revolution. The core of this organization is not a bunch of human-based business processes. It's fundamentally in data factory. It is a pipeline that gathers data and cleans and normalizes, a pipeline for developing algorithms, an experimentation platform where you can run a lot of testing on which algorithms work best and so on, and then a system to productize and deploy in the core of the firm, which if you look inside the black box of the firm, in this example, it's fundamentally a foundation of data, software, interfaces, powering up a bunch of different applications with humans and managers and engineers that are there managing this company. They're designing the services and the software. They're implementing what's going on, but they're not actually in the critical path of delivering the activities. When Ant Financial delivers a new loan, it delivers, actually the process takes 1 second with absolutely zero human intervention in the actual loan allocation, which is pretty amazing. If you look across the economy, what we're seeing is this new kind of digital AI-first company like Ant has a fundamentally different way to deliver value to users. They have usually pretty strong network and learning effects. This kind of means that the value is very little when they start. Like a payment system like Alipay with 1 or 2 users is essentially almost no value. But the value explodes as the scale of the company increases. And now Ant Financial, for example, is valued at $150 billion plus dollars. Very different structure from the traditional company. A traditional product-based company is very siloed. It has IT and data that is trapped in the individual silos and really works really hard to scale to what's essentially a diminishing returns kind of model, really saturated over time. And we're seeing this across many industries. The clash between companies like Ant taking on banks and companies like Airbnb taking on traditional hospitality and hotel companies like Waymo and Uber attacking traditional auto industry companies and financial, of course, and banks. Moderna, fascinating organization in pharmaceutical and vaccine development, really fighting against, it's in some ways really competing with traditional firms like Pfizer. Each kind of company is trying to do the same thing, but they have fundamentally different ways of getting there. Now with COVID, this whole process is accelerated. This is just some data, mobile data, that shows in just a period of 2 weeks, essentially the difference in daily distance travel, the mobility of people. This is in the US, but similar things happen around the world. The mobility essentially stopped. Everybody went home to work or tried to. And the COVID crisis took this kind of transformation, these kinds of challenges created by this new set of firms, and fundamentally made them pervasive across the economy, because all of a sudden, to be digital is to be able to work, to be able to virtualize the kinds of business processes that we have, to still be in business and to be safe at home, which is a huge, huge challenge. We have companies like Moderna, again, showing this model. And Moderna is out there, fundamentally is a software-based biotechnology company, unbelievable operating model, an unbelievable track record so far, with notably pulling together a first batch of potential vaccine to COVID in a total of 25 days. They're now in phase 2 trials. So doing what biotechnology companies have done before, what pharmaceutical companies have done before, but in a completely different way, for a completely different operating model with incredible gains in agility and impact. This is not just changing new companies, but old companies too. It's fascinating. If you look at Mass General Hospital, here in Boston. It's a 210-year-old hospital, fundamentally changing the way that he does medicine and using technology aggressively to be able to cope with the increasing demands of the pandemic on the medical staff, clinical, and so on. And this is my friend Kelly Whitbold, who is attending in the emergency room, who is basically arguing that telemedicine has come to age, and what didn't happen over 10 years has now happened because of COVID in a matter of weeks. So accelerating all kinds of digital adoption with time. We are all right now in a process of digital transformation. I was talking to the chief digital officer of IKEA, the president of Novartis US. Every one of these organizations is driving digital transformation as fast as they can to come along essentially this life cycle, depending on how far they are, they're kind of pushing things to the next stage and going essentially from a traditional organization into trying to become a new kind of company with a foundation of data, software, AI, and algorithms. Now, with all these new opportunities, of course, we've got a bunch of new responsibilities and new challenges coming along. And this is where things get, in some ways, even more interesting, a little scary, a little sad. With this rapid digital transformation, we're seeing all kinds of issues around cybersecurity, around privacy, around algorithmic bias, around concentration of wealth and inclusiveness that we have been seeing at a slower rate over the years because of digital transformation. Now they're literally happening overnight. And so as we think about this, first of all, thank you for listening. It's such a great time to think about and discuss these issues. COVID is driving really an unprecedented level of adoption, where the amount of technology adoption that has happened in the last month and that is going to happen over the next few months as the work transition to hopefully a little more sustainable work is unprecedented. And we're seeing all kinds of opportunities with this and all kinds of challenges. Sort of the idea of many simple agile AI deployments, kind of like the way that Ant Financial was built, to have a single integrated system of record for the data that you have, spinning off a variety of different applications and transforming the nature of companies. As we drive down these opportunities, we need to think really carefully, not just about the exciting potential behind the new technology, but also all kinds of substantial and crucial issues around inclusion, where about 50% of the world, I think, right now is on the internet. There are a lot of people that are not. Issues of privacy, issues of cybersecurity, issues of algorithmic bias are coming to the forefront even more quickly than before. We need to think about enlightening regulation, and we need to help the increasing part of the population that is in greater need. And I'm really looking forward to the discussion around this.
Marco, thank you so much for that really brilliant summary of your fascinating book. Just very quickly, your book talks a lot about that transformation challenge, and obviously that's you could write multiple books on that. What are your quick summary of the biggest challenges for organizations going from where they are now to where they need to go with or without COVID?
We talk a lot about, everybody, many major companies are experimenting with AI. They have pilots going on across many different spaces. We see a lot of different companies adopting and trying out and experimenting with different ways to run traditional processes, say around supply chain or around user and customer interactions, all kinds of different things. But the thing that is a telltale sign of real transformation is really an issue of architecture. It's not fundamentally how much technology you have, at least not that alone, but it's fundamentally how you architect the organization. That an AI-first company is architected very different from a traditional firm. Traditional firm is built around silos, organizations that are focused enough for traditional management systems to work well. An AI-first company has a very flat layer that is really data-centric, that forms sort of a coherent data architecture, and that architecture mirrors the architecture of the company. So you have these companies that are built different. And the transformation issue for a company, ranging from Novartis to Mass General to the Harvard Business School is probably the last in line in this, is to go from a very siloed structure traditionally where everybody guards their own data and has their own ways of doing things to one that's integrated with this consistent platform that is much easier to scale, can drive all kinds of agility and flexibility in the company, and is also much easier to manage from an ethics perspective. So you don't have inconsistent policies that cut across the organization.
Fantastic. So the core thing here is obviously the IKT architecture, which is very much something we'd always associate with IBM. And Jesus, turning to you, maybe you in our pre-discussion, you told us you would talk to us about the gifts of the COVID-19 pandemic. So please unleash your gifts.
Yeah, we're obviously used to hear all the bad things that COVID brings, and it's a terrible impact, human impact to start with, but then also economic impact. But there is some benefits of having an event like this that can create some good. So when we talk about the gifts of COVID-19, I think a way to structure it is we're seeing acceleration of three categories of actions. One is the acceleration of digitalization, this forcing function that has taken digitalization of work or life, from what was something optional, something to be opted in, to what becomes something mandatory, something that you would have to opt out because it is the only way that you can get things done. It's the only way that you can buy. Is the only way that you can work. Is the only way that you can do a number of things. And that has an impact on what has been the number one blocker of companies actually moving to more digital workflows. So a couple of examples as it projects to AI is the massive adoption of what is the consumer, more of the consumer version of AI. And for example, virtual agents. Virtual agents is not new technology. It's technology that has been out there for a number of years, but it has been adopted at a pace unprecedented, over 100% increase, as well as the time that it takes to get deployed. We have seen and we have implemented virtual agents to basically handle the communication capacity of people just asking questions. Where do I go? How do I do this? In as little as 18 hours. So what used to take many weeks or months, now it takes 18 hours to just implement, train, and put out a certified virtual agent that can even deal with regulated environments like a hospital environment. So massive adoption in a rapid pace of that technology. Another great example is the adoption of AI as a forecasting mechanism. Traditional forecasting mechanisms like regression and statistics work well within an 80% predictability factor in steady environments, in environments where history is a good predictor of the future. But what we have with COVID-19 is basically is more like what I would call like the weather paradigm, where whatever the weather was yesterday is not a predictor of what the weather is going to be tomorrow. Well, that has happened in supply chains across the planet and has created not only that new requirement to estimate demand with historic data that isn't really very useful, but also do that at a granularity level, which is very hyper-local. I mean, you just take the map of the United States. There were some states that had extra ventilators and extra masks, and some states that were in desperate need of them. So it's no longer just valid to have a view of what a supply chain demand and supply is in an aggregate level. You have to do it at a very hyper local level, and the only good way to do that is using artificial intelligence. Right? It is a better mechanism to model complex surfaces, and is less dependable on just the history. It can adapt better and much faster to the new requirements. We have also seen, it's not only rosy. We have seen the bad actors also working overtime. We have seen over a 14,000% increase in cybersecurity risks as we all massively has extended the attack surface. We track over 50 specific COVID-19 campaigns. These are phishing campaigns trying to take advantage of the everybody's thirst for information to actually capture private data and then what there cause harm. So a lot of protection on that. With that, increase of digitalization, we've seen the second category. So this is all the category of massive increase of digitalization. What before took 5 years, now it can be done in 5 weeks. A great opportunity, great gift, if you want. Some of the reason for that is the second category. The second category is a significant change in behaviors. And some of this behavior change, they're not temporary. They're going to be permanent changes. For example, it's interesting that we have many of those of us that have the fortune that have a job that can be actually done remotely. We are teleworking. The change of teleworking has been over 500%. That's actually not a surprise. What is a surprise is we just did a survey in the United States to 30,000 adults. And we asked them about this topic of telecommuting and saying, once you can safely return to your workplace, what would you like to do? And 80% in the month of May, 80% of the people said, actually, I would prefer to retain the option to continue to telework and telecommute. And that is up from 75% that was in May. So the trend is increasing. So even though everybody talks about cabin fever and how badly we want to get out, actually a lot of people saying this is not that bad, and having the option is something good. Telemedicine was mentioned before. At the beginning of this year, you can take Mayo Clinic, for example. The beginning of this year, there was single-digit telemedicine visits being completed. In the survey that we did, over 31% of US adults have actually completed. That's 1 in 3 people have actually completed a telemedicine visit. And when we ask what would be their intent going forward, 43% of the people, so more even than the people that have done it, say that they will prefer telemedicine to a regular visit if it becomes an option. So suddenly, the entire health system is going through a change of digitization to implement telemedicine at a bigger pace than the last 10 years combined. Like if you're a provider, a health provider, and you don't have that option, you're going to struggle because that's where consumers are going to go. Esports, another example, 500% increase in adoption of esports. So significant changes in behavior that are moving consumers closer to digital experiences combined to the physical experiences that you could say is also a gift, because the lack of user adoption was one of the main blockers for what would be a proper digitalization. With this, brings a third category, which is what I call the acceleration of dilemmas that we were dealing with before, but now they have been also faced with us. And I don't know if this is a gift or not, but one of them is what I call the dilemma of contact tracing. Many government officials, many cities, many countries are being put in the dilemma of having to choose between privacy or saving lives. That's a dilemma that just back in January, this would not even be a discussion. They're very, clear geographically. The planet is clearly segmented into the people that believe that public health is over privacy rights, and the people that believe privacy rights are the foundation of democracy and you can touch them. But it gets a lot more complicated when you have to face on saying, okay, if I'm religious about privacy, 50,000 more people will die. Would you make that trade? That dilemma becomes more complicated, and I'll let Karen expand on that. She handles this much better than I would. I think the other one is the dilemma of what is a company to do? Like in the face of this, if you're a company, whether a small entrepreneur or a big company, what you do? And I think is what has come very clear is the response of the world has in a way declared that stakeholder capitalism actually matters. That for the most part, when given a choice between the health and the economy, the health has won. In this survey that I was mentioning, 69% of the people said that they would gladly trade the health of their family for losing their jobs if that's what it takes, right? So in a way, it has brought us to this perspective that we can't be blind about application of technology, if it is not in synergy with the humanity and the good for society. So the dilemma that we have been talking about of how technology should integrate with people has come to the forefront, and our recommendation is, you clearly, because of all these trends, every company needs to invest in technology because it's not an option anymore. You actually need to be able to operate your workflows in a digital way, but that will only work and sustain advantage if it is done, if you invest as much in the people as you invest in the technology. So invest as much in human intelligence as you invest in artificial intelligence. And that means skills, and that means training, and that means the capabilities. Make sure that every company has created the capabilities that know how to operate on what is an, as we just learned, what is an AI-centric company. That can only work if you have people that know how to operate on that.
Fantastic. That's a brilliant summary of some of the challenges companies face. I think you've brilliantly articulated some of those really deep, visceral choices that people are being forced to make between, health and security and health and employment and so on. But Karen, over to you, which obviously this is the area where I think you've done a lot of thinking about. And I think one of the other challenges that Jesus mentioned is things that used to take 5 years now take 5 weeks. And when you're moving at that pace, the risk of making mistakes presumably gets bigger, which is when your world of law comes into it. So over to you.
Absolutely. And thank you. And I can't imagine a better setup. I was a little concerned that Jesus would be the good news and I'd be the bad news. But I don't think it's that simple, and I don't think it's bad news for almost exactly the reasons Jesus was describing, which is, and all of this is underscored by the COVID situation. And I think it was present, but we are now not only anticipating, but really feeling the acceleration of adoption, acceleration of impact of these technologies, and likewise the scaling of the risks and the scaling of the opportunities that these technologies represent. And Jesus also touched on the sort of unique aspect of COVID in just a straight up AI risk way, which is that it creates an enormous discontinuity in data, right? Which is, to the extent you're looking at AI as a way to rely on past experience to aid, smart predictions about the future, how we do that and what the data mean and how we handle AI outcomes now is a little bit different and requires a little more scrutiny. Which brings me to a couple of different ways that we can look at risk. When we think about AI and what it fundamentally is, when you move outside of the engineering world into the business application world, which is what we're seeing more and more of, and that accelerating curve that Marco showed us, that's really the big change, is that this stuff is moving from innovation settings into real world live settings with real impacts and real challenges, both for the businesses that are deploying the technologies, but for the customers, for the employees, for the suppliers that are impacted. And when you do that, you notice sort of a couple of things, right? You notice that community standards around these technologies are changing much, much more quickly than regulation and law are. And then certainly then norms have been developed. And that leaves business in an interesting position of needing to make pretty fateful decisions about what the technologies will do and what they won't do before there are really good guidance out there, or ubiquitous guidance about how to think about these problems. And so these discussions, and IBM has been really on the forefront, along with Microsoft and others, of really provoking these conversations, which is good. I would make one observation too at the beginning, which is that every company is now a tech company. There are the companies that are built around technology, and again, Marco sort of described how they look very, very different. But every company out there now is, if they don't know they're dealing with this issue, they are dealing with this issue, and they're shortly going to know it. And so when you think about what AI is, it's masses of data with very complicated math building models that create predictions. And some of those predictions are going to be correct, and some of those are going to be be incorrect. And so we're dealing with, sort of broadly speaking, risks of mistake, just where errant outcomes. We're dealing with risks of bias. We're dealing with risks, and this is the one I think is maybe one of the hardest ones, which is that the AI is working fine, the model's perfect, but it produces results that are either at odds with a legal standard or an ethical standard, or just some other business purpose, right? That it's throwing up outcomes that are just in contravention of some other very important policy. We're dealing with security risks and hackers and malactors. And then there's the category of risks that I would sort of refer to right now as sort of the hashtag 2020 risks, right? Which is just the things that no one saw coming or didn't see coming in the order that they came, or with the impacts that they're having. And that's leading to, if you translate that to business, you're looking at just business errors, sort of decision making based on faulty inputs. You've got business continuity issues, because the way these technologies are built is very, very widely. So a lot of these technologies are really constructed on many different inputs from many different suppliers. And when you think about contracting and protecting your rights and your access to technology very, very far upstream, that raises new sorts of challenges. There's obviously reputational risk and ethical risk, which are more and more tightly bound. And then there's legal risk. And when you talk about legal risk, don't have a lot of sort of new laws specifically aimed at AI right now. That's changing. You can start to see the legislative efforts around the world. I think the EU and is certainly leading in this area. But U.S. states individually and collectively are starting to think through how to what sorts of requirements to place around these technologies. But we've got lots of laws that read on to the existing sort of weak AI technologies that are out there, things that prevent discrimination in employment and talent development, progression, things that laws that impact lending standards, laws that impact equal access to certain kinds of financial and social opportunities. So mostly sounding in the anti-discrimination areas, but also really interesting questions coming up right now around liability, how to protect, anticipate risk in contract, and then how to remediate loss when something has gone wrong. And when you think about liability, it's sort of interesting. There's the question of, what is the liability of an AI agent that makes a decision? That's the autonomous decision-making question. But what's the liability of humans who are relying on AI inputs when they're making decisions? And that's the physician who's got, AI-assisted, pulmonary reads. And we're seeing that now in, for instance, there's been some reporting out that some of the early COVID detection technologies that were AI assisted were all trained on, for instance, male lungs. And so they were missing COVID in female patients. Not all of them were doing that, but some of them were doing that. And if you're a healthcare provider, how educated do you need to be to understand which version of that tool are you using or was purchased for you by your institution? So a lot of these sort of opportunities for the 5 different kinds of risk are making their way now into the field, and the law is just really sort of starting to catch up. So in my work with business leaders trying to figure out what to do in an environment where where the business questions are arising before there's legal guidance, really, and where standards are changing and they're going to be judged. Everyone knows you're going to be judged your decisions today are going to be judged on the basis of the standards that haven't yet been developed. What do you do? And I think one of the things that you do is exactly what Jesus was talking about, which is you think about, I think not just about AI tools, but about AI systems and trustworthy systems. And those systems involve people as much as they involve the tools. And it's not enough. You'll hear terms around like human in the loop isn't really sufficient, because really for every business problem, there's a solution set that involves the technology, this very new, powerful technology that gives us insights and outstrips our ability to analyze inputs as quickly or as well. But it also involves all the people who developed it, designed it, analyzed the data, authenticated the data, trained the tool, and then importantly, instructed it. And so one thing I would lead you with is that the teams that select these tools and instruct these tools need to instruct them not only what to do, but what not to do, because that what not to do is going to be just as important to the risk analysis as the what to do. So I'll wrap it up now, but lots to talk about and to unpack in the context of making sure that the teams as well as the technology are fully developed and supported.
Brilliant. Well, thank you. I think that's that quote of sort of every company is now a tech company, whether they know it or not, sort of totally plays back to what Marco and users were saying. But I think the other thing that comes out very clearly from particularly the last two presenters is the importance of people and investing in people and getting people in the right sort of place. So, Vinay, over to you. You work in one of the world's largest people advisory firms. So, what's your perspective on this?
Absolutely. I think for us, AI is something that will serve leadership as opposed to the other way around. We were looking at 2020 from a Ferry perspective and breaking it up into two parts. The first part is around the health crisis, which we think is still to be sorted out, and then the economic crisis that will probably follow. And in keeping with that transformation, we were looking at sort of the impact of AI in making companies future ready. I'm going to try and see if I can get my presentation on the screen as we speak. There we are. It was fascinating listening to Marco on this, and I'll start with the big picture. It plays into what I heard Marco walk through, and I guess what Karen and Jesus spoke about. When we walked into the crisis, it was already clear that the world of mobility was over. It was all about cognitive software. Companies were talking about building cognitive software. And it was not about digital transformation. It was no longer about addressing one part of the company, but the company end to end. And as everybody mentioned, what that resulted in is a huge increase in the pace of digital transformation and companies sort of reimagining their core operating processes. For a people strategy firm such as us, that essentially meant looking at the digital toolbox a board or a CEO would deploy. There are around 8 tools today in the digital toolbox. And these are tools that are deployed to change a company. And consequently, there's been a war of talent in terms of the supply chain of talent in each of these areas and the ability for companies to transform in this space. But behind the scenes, we're also staring at perhaps one of the major point of inflections for us as a company and as an industry, which is for, I'll try and go to the next slide if that's possible. And all of us grew up with the economic principle of using labor and capital to increase productivity, right? But in the world of AI, there's technology that's part of the equation. And frankly, you'll probably have to use less labor, a lot more capital, a lot more technology, and your productivity goes up. So questions were asked around what would the boards and the CEOs do going forward if they have a choice of deploying a lot more technology and capital to get higher productivity. What role will labor, human resources play in this? Ironically, for us, human resources will play a significant part in this journey. Because if you step back, as you build that AI factory that Marco spoke about, built on network and algorithms, this is essentially having a place or an enterprise where the human-to-machine workflow and the machine-to-machine workflow will coexist. Today, the machine-machine workflow is a smaller part of the proposition. A lot of companies have a lot more human-to-machine workflow. But going forward, if there is a lot more machine-to-machine workflow in your organization, it gets larger and more relevant, then this is going to have a significant impact on the way you organize yourself, the way you hire talent, and the way you build your culture. And goes without saying that COVID, given that it's led to a significant increase in the amount of digital adoption happening in recent times, it's got clients to come and think about where they are today and whether they're ready for that in the future. Go to the next slide. This is an audit of what we step into when we talk to our clients. Will the workforce of the future change? Do we have the right people, the right skills, the right spend, the right size, and the right shape? And are we doing this remotely or on site? But if you double click and go beyond the obvious work structure, there are three themes that come out of it. The first is around org structure. Companies, I think Marco mentioned this, Jesus mentioned it, and Karen alluded to it. Companies have traditionally been organized around silos. If you take a large IT service company, they are multi-billion-dollar silos that serve certain purpose. Going forward, companies will be organized a lot more around people and communities and networks. The breakdown of silos will lead to a lot more data sharing, and an AI-relevant organization needs that data flow to be effective. So we see a significant change in the way companies are organized today. And this is not easy because companies have traditionally been organized for predictability. Change is something that they haven't adopted very easily to. But if they are going to look at the future, the silos and the hierarchy would come under scrutiny. The second part of it is around talent. And I think COVID has proved that you can work remotely successfully. But what that brings up from a talent perspective is that it leads to a plural population of talent. You don't just have the multiple generations, be it the baby boomers or Gen X, but you also have folks who'll be working full-time, some of them working part-time, those in the gig economy, those in the in a contract or a service. And so your talent pool becomes extremely plural from the sort of monolithic talent pool you had in the past. And it's important not just to manage these multiple talent pools, but also to make sure that they are protected in an AI world. Benefits is an example of that. I mean, how do you protect them from a rewards and benefits standpoint, not just in terms of a social safety net, but also to build a degree of cohesiveness around it. The other big challenge for the talent ecosystem is reskilling. If you have to keep pace with the change in business models, this is to take large constituencies of your current population within a company and skill them in new areas. Something which perhaps is going to be, in our opinion, one of the biggest challenges for most firms that are trying to stay relevant. And the last bit is around leadership. Thankfully, in the world of AI, machines today, at least in weak AI, they don't have a conscience. Machines are morally neutral until you start applying them. And they would look to leaders to not just use technology for efficiency and scalability, but they also want leaders to provide, I think what Karen mentioned, which is just to define the values of good citizenship in a digital network. It is perhaps the most important aspect of a successful AI implementation, because the technology is something that can be tweaked. The culture of your organization in a sort of non-hierarchical, non-siloed world, where it's a plural population of talent, the culture and ethics part of it and the leadership around it is very, very critical. So as we see it, the one corporate function that will perhaps play the most significant role in this journey is the human resources function. They're a tipping point in terms of the transformation, and they will define what good looks like for the future. I'm going to move to the next slide, and my last slide to wrap this off. As someone who spends his time with leaders, looking at hiring leaders and defining what success looks like, I'm often asked the question in the context of AI, will machines replace us? No, they won't. The bigger fear is, will we end up becoming machines? Human skill, human creativity, human ingenuity, are the assets on which a good AI platform operates. Because AI treats decision making as a science and not an art. And therein lies both its strength and its weakness. It's unable to look beyond the absolute goal numbers. COVID is an example of the fact that there's a sudden increase in data consumption. There is very little insight. Just look at the stock markets right now and the exuberance they're showing. If you ask someone why is it that employment is at all-time high, all-time low, I beg your pardon, all the economic factors are weak, and yet the markets are being exuberant. Very little insight in terms of what the path ahead stands for. The other benefit of AI and all new technology is that it gives us back the gift of time. We can do things faster. And for a leader of any company, that's worth its weight in gold. And as Karen mentioned, none of this is possible until you have ethics in place. I saw IBM mention its decision yesterday about facial recognition. These are the kind of leadership decisions that we should see much more of in the market. The New York Times has above its masthead the line that says all the news that's fit to print. Going forward, companies need to have a similar approach in terms of their ethics.
Brilliant. So thank you. It's a great sort of run through on some of the people challenges coming up. There's a look at the questions from the audience, and thank you for all those questions. There's a recurring theme that comes through is trust. And what is it we could do to build trust and maintain trust? And is trust going to increase or decrease? Just very quickly for everyone, if you wouldn't mind, Marco, what's your perspective around trust as a key part of this process?
Well, I mean, I think it's one of the most essential things to do in really driving implementation and transformation. But it's a really complicated thing because right now, I mean, as Karen said, it was already tricky to begin with. And then all of a sudden, now we're in a huge rush, right, to do all these things. And when you go so fast, mistakes can be made very quickly. And I think it's going to be interesting over the next couple of months. Literally, I think a lot of decisions will be made by a variety of different organizations that would, and sort of both companies as well as governments that would last for us for a long period of time. So it's a really crucial time to think it through. And I think, I mean, it's sort of clear in some ways what we can do to build more trust around these technologies about how we use them. In certain cases, we have tough trade-offs like Jesus was talking about. But there's also, there's better ways of doing this. There's better ways to build data platforms to ensure more privacy. There's better ways to think through technology to avoid bias issues. There are ways to think about inclusion and retraining. And so I think that, I hope that people do think, take the opportunity to think about it, because I think the next couple of months are going to be absolutely essential for many things that would stay with us for many years.
And Karen, you mentioned what you don't do is often as important as what you do. What's the worst thing you've seen people do to blow trust, and how do you avoid it?
I think rush. I think is what people. The biggest mistake is this mistake that that getting out the door fast is the same thing as getting out the door right, and where there are unintended. I mean, they're famous ones about. The early days of the Tay chatbot, which in 24 hours sort of lost its mind. What little mind it had, but it just wasn't thought through, and taking the time to think through. So just to come back to trust for a second, I actually start with integrity and I like that because it has sort of an architectural component to it as well as a moral one, which is it needs soundness. And it needs coherence and robustness. And that is both a product quality function and it is a systems quality function. And if you have integrity, then you can build trust on that. And that's a series of rules that, but it takes a little bit of time. And just taking a deep breath, as Marco said, to sort of think this through, because the decisions we make next are very, very important. And it's a little bit like learning to drive. Like when none of us was born knowing how to do that, but we all learned how to do it. And we don't all know how to build a car. We don't all need to know how to build a car, but we need to know how to operate it safely without running into other people or other things or off edges of roads. So it's we can learn this and we can do this, but we need to train, we need to think, we need to apply some integrity on the front end to build trust on the back end.
Tim, just add one thing. I mean, our leaders are not trained for this. We have not taught them how to do this. One of the things that we talk about is like the scalability of these digital models is huge. You can go to 1 billion, 2 billion people if you want. So if you mess something up, the consequences are enormous. And so, and fundamentally, nobody has this right. It's not like this. You have a new generation of companies that has figured out the ethics of this. I think that there is an enormous amount to figure out as we think through this. And I think Karen is absolutely right. First you start with integrity. First you start with, what do you think deeply as you think about sort of human philosophies and human principles are the right things to get right. And then really think it through, because you can't experiment and try it out, because when you have 1 billion people in your network, screwing something up has repercussions.
At scale. Now, I'm sorry, Karen. I'd love to ask Jesus' view, because especially IBM at the moment today, or yesterday, announced they weren't going to monetize their facial recognition technology, which strikes as being a really great way to go out there and claim trust on this.
Yeah, and it's a decision that we had made last year, so we just reinforced it and reiterated in the context of where we are, and I think it comes back down to something that Karen said that I want to repeat, which is a human society doesn't accept mathematical optimums as the right answer, where an AI system, it is designed to always find the mathematical optimum. If you really think what a neural network does is it keeps iterating to always optimize a given mathematical function. So what happens is you really have to overlay the ethics of society on top of AI systems to limit that just because an AI system can do something, it doesn't mean that it should do it.
Great.
The other element of it is, even if you can limit it, to the extent that humans can eliminate that limitation, then you're still creating the opportunity for misuse. And that's a little bit of like in this element of facial recognition. There is nothing inherently wrong with technology that can recognize a face. It can be extremely useful. So our position is we really are not going to participate in any use of that technology that would represent any invasion of privacy as we accept it as society. So,
fantastic to hear that.
So the use of the technology to facilitate, like to basically improve a picture because it knows where your face and where your body is and adjust the lighting. Yeah. Well, we think that's fine, but that's not facial recognition. That is a face recognition, is a picture.
Right.
Technology that actually tries to portray that into who you are as an individual, where you were, that is something that we will not participate in.
Great to hear that. Very quickly, I've got someone waving a gun at me at the background saying you got to get off the stage now. You've got 10 seconds each to answer this question. You have an audience of people who are going home to their office to start working on the future. And in 10 years' time, they'll look back at this COVID moment and go, this was a big pivot moment. Did I do the right thing? What is the one thing, and please really, really quickly, what is the one thing you advise them to do when they open up their home office tomorrow morning? Vinny?
Reskill.
Thank you. Karen?
Get your board and management involved and tasked on this now.
Fantastic. Jesus?
I would say look as much as how people use technology as you look at technology itself. So the interface between the people and technology is a bigger element of success than how powerful the technology is.
Brilliant. And Marco, over to you.
Look hard at all the experiments that you've run to cope with the pandemic, and people have tried all kinds of interesting things. Pick out the best things and make sure we sustain them over time. The world is not coming back to the way it was.
Fantastic. What's lovely is we've had a conversation about artificial intelligence, and we've reminded ourselves that people are what really matter, and they're the ones who will take us through this. And getting the trust right with people is absolutely critical for us to win our way through COVID-19 and make AI a successful technology for the next decade. Thank you very much, everyone. It's been a lovely panel. It's been a pleasure being here. Thank you. Joy, over to you.
And thank you, Tim. Thank you, Jesus, Karen, Vinay, Marco. And that was a wonderful discussion, lively and real intelligence about artificial intelligence. Stay with us on the summit stage where we will be speaking to Ruby Wax and Julia Hobsbawm. You just need to click through to the next link. Thanks again, everybody.
Want access to more CogX videos? Subscribe now for free at cogx.co.